Ladies and gentlemen, I'm flying solo tonight. We're talking about a topic that I think is a good candidate for the very first thing that anybody should know when they're debating. Whenever they're starting to study debate, whenever they're trying to um, become better at it, the first lesson is something that people disagree about all the time. And some people talk about presumptions, and some people talk about arguments, things like that. But the civility, I think, is probably the best way to start. Okay, uh, and the way that I like to start the discussion is with an article, actually, because it kind of gets people all on the same page. I really enjoy this one article. It's called "The Other Side Is Not Dumb," and it's by Sean Blanda. I'm going to post this in the comments right now, and then send that out to everyone. In this article, it has some really good concepts, but the thesis of it really is how to be a better arguer or a better debater. And the number one thing that you can do is question whether or not you are right or wrong. And so there's a lot of concepts that are brought up that are real in this article that I think is really awesome. It talks about who uh, people who are having a discussion or a disagreement, and one of the things is the bias that other people think like you. Okay, the false consensus bias. So you walk around thinking that people think like you, and to some degree they are, but more along the lines agree with you, that you are on the same page. You're hanging together, and so you must agree. And so the false consensus bias is that, oh, this person probably comes to the same conclusions that I do, and there's a whole lot of variety when it comes to different conclusions. But there is, and that variety isn't apparent, and he disagrees with you. The knee-jerk reaction is to say, well, they're stupid. And the thought that the other person is stupid is so sort of reflexive that we think that it's right. I mean, it's our intuition that this person must be stupid because they haven't come to the same conclusion that we do. But if you really stop and think about it, there are so many different ways that somebody can come to a particular conclusion. And it has a lot to do with the information that you have either been fed or that you have kind of surrounded yourself with. And so that's another concept, not just the false consensus bias, but echo chamber is a really good concept. And that concept is the idea that when you are like when you're trying to consume information, right? When you're trying to inform yourself, and not necessarily listening to music or anything like that, that could include it, but more along the lines of trying to gain knowledge, useful knowledge about things, that you tend to surround yourself with information that already confirms the things that you believe. Well, I mean, yeah. So the echo chamber creates it to seem like that there is more agreement than there is. There's another facet to it that I also find really, really fascinating, and that has to do with the information age. Is that in the echo chamber, it can be a very literal thing that we could actually measure, and that what I mean by that is information travels so quickly nowadays that an article that is published under one name, or even on a more of an anonymous name like an organization or something like that, that can be um, uh, copied onto other organizations, and it happens all the time. Now, sometimes it's completely legitimate, like the Associated Press, is trying to get out good information. But there's a sort of a more sinister version of this where people trying to create the sensation that there are more articles in agreement than there really are. And so the same article will just literally just be copy and pasted with a few comments added to it. And now it seems like another publication that's saying the same thing, but really it's the same organization with a bunch of subsidiaries that are trying to do it. And so that creates the illusion that there's more agreement than there is. So believe people just agree with you, and then surrounding yourself with a bunch of information that already confirms that is a really common thing that happens, and you might be guilty of it. Man, when I first sort of realized that, that was kind of shook me. You know what I mean? I'm like, oh man, how can I test that? What can I do to figure it out? And debate was one of those things. So I know that that some people have a different sort of motivation to get into debate, and that is more of like intellectually dominating people. I mean, if you think about the implication when someone is like, I don't want to debate with you right now. Why do you always debate me? That's not necessarily the nicest of connotations, right? It is the idea that you are just trying to win the argument, that winning the argument is paramount to what you are saying. Maybe that means that you're a liar. It kind of seems like when people say is like, oh, when you're doing that, they're calling you like being disingenuous, right? And so that seems like people kind of assume that debate is uncivil. They kind of assume that there's just a bunch of bickering, and that hasn't really been my experience. Like, I don't feel like I've had to compromise the things that I believe. I questioned them, and I kind of, tested certain arguments out to see how they seemed and what the responses were to them. That was usually what it is. I wanted to see what people used in response to it, and sometimes I was persuaded by that. But I never felt like I had to be disingenuous about what I personally believed. Oftentimes, when I didn't know, then I kind of go, well, there's evidence right here. I'm going to provide this evidence, and I'll see what my opponent brings up. And like obscure places around the world where this is what I read. This is the information that came up. I'm honestly arguing it. And so sometimes I was wrong. Sometimes I was wrong, but that doesn't mean I felt like I was compromising. It doesn't feel like I was trying to manipulate people or the truth or the evidence into something that it wasn't. I always felt like you could be a very honest and genuine individual in debate, no matter what side you were given. And I think that's one thing that is missed by like the people outside of debate and people inside of debate, that this assumption that that you just love the fight, and it's really not the love of the fight that well, I mean, that's not why I got into it. I mean, I got like uneasy about that. It seemed like just this flood of information, and I got to make my own sort of conclusions because I could count on my opponent to bring their side of the debate. I could count on them to do that. And then I knew that was the best that was the other side had to offer. And so it was just seemed like a really great way to know things. And as long as everyone sort of realized that we're all just we're just doing an exercise, then it seemed civil all the time. Or it didn't seem any less civil than normal conversations with anybody else. There's another aspect to why sometimes people debates devolve into things that are less than civil, and I think it has something to do with the Dunning-Kruger effect. So I wanted to show you a nice little graph right here. Take a look at this. So on the horizontal, you got knowledge in the field. So this would be if you can measure actual knowledge in a field, that would be on the horizontal. And on the vertical, you have confidence in your knowledge about a particular subject. So the whole thing here is about one subject, and it's like how much knowledge do you have on that subject, and how confident are you in about your knowledge. So at the very beginning, like you start with zero understanding, and then as soon as you learn a thing or two, you feel like a genius in the subject. And after a little bit more study, you're like, oh my goodness, the next stage right there is there's more to this than I thought. So you start losing confidence in your knowledge in the field, realizing that there's a whole lot more to it, feeling like you're never going to understand it, and then coming back and having a degree of confidence, but that confidence now matches your actual knowledge in the field. That's the Dunning-Kruger effect. And I think the people who understand a little bit more in the field trying to convince uh, individuals that just started their knowledge in it can see them as fairly dumb. And I could see why that would be. I think the Dunning-Kruger effect is one really good sort of example of why that might be. On the other hand, when I learned that, I thought to myself, I may not have committed it to memory, but I had to have committed that probably several times over in any time I started studying anything, philosophy, or it was, my drawing classes, or anything else like that. Like I automatically thought I was a genius, and I may push that out of my memory. Um, but I'm definitely in multiple fields of study feel, like I'm like, oh man, this is like I'm starting to realize which ones I'm like, I don't know that much about that, and I'm sort of stepping off of it. Like one of them being economics. I don't remember any economics classes. I did a whole lot of economics discussions, in debates, but it wasn't like I ever, cracked open a textbook and went through a course or anything like that and had like an expert, like a professor, reflect back to me with some feedback. I think that would have been probably a good sort of stage of that, or a major honor in that. And so I find myself being back from those debates right now, and I think it's precisely because I got to this point where and so a bit of tolerance when somebody starts coming across as maybe an unwitting sort of casualty of the Dunning-Kruger effect, I think goes a long way. I feel that a lot now. I'm starting to feel my age, as far as level of experience. The sort of relationship that I have with my students seems, the gap seems a little wider than it was before. And so I feel like they kind of interact with me a little bit different, and I with them as well. And so having such an age gap, that might lead to sort of like, these kids don't know what the hell they're talking about, or reverse is kind of like, that old guy is not with the times anymore. That might sort of come up, and but I don't experience it all that much personally. Like I don't really have that sort of feedback. Maybe they're just hiding it from me. I don't know. Um, Oh, so back to the other side is not dumb article. One, so what do we talk about? We talk about the false consensus bias, and then we talked about the echo chamber, and then there is it, the phenomenon where where you look for things that already confirm what you already believe. Okay, that you are trying to. I remember one time I was having a debate with somebody about whether or not those Supreme Court nominations were held up. And I know for a fact that I heard that a Supreme Court nomination has not been held up, like, what was it, since the Civil War. And so I forgot about that little caveat, that little qualifier, that since the Civil War. And when I was talking with somebody, they brought that up. I'm like, no, that's not true. And so I still think I have a case, but that was one time since I had read the article that the other side is not dumb, where I actually sort of committed to memory one time that I was just wrong. You know what I mean? And or that I didn't quite notice. I heard it a little bit wrong. I committed it to memory just a little bit wrong. There's like a lot of different ways that I was wrong, or might have explained why I was wrong. But the point is like I could have definitely phrased my ideas better, and I definitely did not have some information beforehand that I should have had. And so that one sort of scenario right there, I don't know if you take enough moments to recognize when you're wrong and to remember when you are wrong and kind of humble yourself a little bit. There was a fascinating study that I saw at one time with children, and the children were given boxes, and on the boxes it said cookies. Okay, now I forget exactly what age group it was, but let's say it was like 4 to 5 year olds who were given this box that said cookies, and inside there were crayons, and so they said, "Hey, what do you think is inside this box?" And they say cookies, and they open up its crayons, and they're kind of like, "Okay, what did you think was inside this box before we opened it?" And those kids would always change what they said. They're like, "Oh, I thought there was crayons in the box." You only need to jump ahead, what was it, like 3 or 4 years, and you get like 7 or 8 year olds doing the exact same thing, and they recall that they guessed wrong. And I think that's a fascinating little thing that I'm when I heard it that one time, I'm like, oh man, I don't think we ever stop doing that. I don't think we ever stop pretending that we aren't wrong. And that in debate, you are confronted with that all the time. People vote against you all the time. Even the best debaters win like 80% of the time, 75% of the time. The best debaters, you know what I mean? It is quite an accomplishment to finish out a tournament with 0 losses or 0 drop ballots, even like when you're talking about panels of judges. Like you are constantly confronted with the fact that you're wrong on things, and I don't know, I like that. I really do kind of like figuring that stuff out, like finding out that you're wrong. But how far does it extend? Is there really like no boundary where civility, you can extend it to? I mean, think about all the topics, and what if someone's saying something really offensive, really just I mean, and like they're trying to insult you? Okay, I don't know, it seems kind of hard to do it right there. I don't think that's the situation that Sean Blanda is talking about, and the other side is not dumb, and that's not the situation in debate either. You know what I mean? It's like we don't just have people coming out, just saying like horribly personal things like that. But but where is that line? If you listen to an argument and you're like, oh my God, that is a horribly offensive argument. If somebody is completely in the dark about why it's offensive, at what point, in what context can you respond to that with, just believing that they're not quite intelligent enough to be part of this conversation? It's like, that's not even a nice way to say it. Like, is there really no limit to that? I don't know. One thing that I decided to test was people who have wildly different beliefs on one thing, and I checked out the flat earthers. And because if there was any example that would test this theory out of whether or not the other side is not dumb, that would be it. If you don't know, there is a big group of people that believe the earth is flat. And I know I'm not going to win any awards for saying this, but I'm going to disagree respectfully. But the point is that if you can listen to their arguments and kind of come to the conclusion that they're not dumb, then I think that's a pretty good test. And I did that. I mean, I looked into some flat earth arguments, and it's some wild stuff, but some of them are creative arguments. Now, I'm going to go on record as saying I'm not a flat earther, but when they have this like big wall of ice around the edge of the earth, I'm like, okay, that's creative. That's creative, right? And that creativity, at the very least, I'm like, okay, that's not dumb. That's not dumb. That is creative. It really helped me sort of realize how much more often I should just say, I disagree. Just say I disagree, right? Not you're wrong, not you're evil or anything like that. I disagree. It seems, and it really does kind of help, sort of, you're like, I think we're done. I think we've heard everything that we need to say. And I think it is a civil way to engage in any sort of dispute. Just kind of say, well, it looks like we disagree. And like that sort of level of confidence that it takes to realize that, it's just a disagreement. I guess I can't do that. So let me see. We got ourselves, we normally have Tim Seavey from Visolutions and Matthew Shapiro, JD, but Tim is out in, I think it is, oh man, he's having a good old time somewhere right now. But he asks, when is it valuable to concede some points? Identify common ground as a tactic of persuasion. Strategic concessions is one of those sort of revelations that when I realized that you didn't have to just refute what your opponent said, that you can kind of like, there are some things that you don't need to respond to all the time. And coming to those strategic, like there has to be this central point to whatever's being said. And you'd be surprised at how often people lose the central point. And that's some of the frustrating conversations I have with people, because I've gotten kind of good at staying on point. I'm kind of like, that's an interesting argument for another time, but let's stay on point. So making concessions is when you say, it's like, well, that doesn't necessarily refute my central thesis. Like if you're on the affirmative, you're like, the plan that I propose, that's all that matters, right? And it's kind of like, okay, there might be some better alternatives that we can do simultaneously, but that doesn't make my idea bad. Just because there are other good ideas doesn't make this a bad idea. And so pointing that out in debate is known as a permutation, that you kind of sort of absorb that. And that in a sense is like a strategic concession. You're kind of saying, that sounds good also, but that's not a reason why we shouldn't do my arguments. And so that is, Tim, by the way, is out in Costa Rica right now. So coming back tanned in February. Strategic concessions are a wonderful tactic to learn. And it surprisingly takes a long time to realize that, a surprisingly long time to realize I don't have to just go down the list of the things that they said and provide a response to each one. That seems kind of like the first sort of novice lesson in how to win a debate. Once you start going, it's like, wait a minute, their second argument and their fifth argument don't necessarily support each other. In fact, they kind of contrast each other. And you say, all right, I'm going to concede one and I'm going to respond to the other. And so that strategic concession sort of just points out to like a judge or an audience member, that you understand what the central point is, but it also kind of like it adds an extra sort of layer on that as well. So yeah, I really do like that one article. I think it answers the issue of civility in a debate really well. Okay. So we got ourselves just about 5 minutes left, and I think I'm going to have yeah. And so I'm just gonna wrap it up by talking about one of the things that um, the article says, which is about being wrong, about taking yourself to that you have to be willing to sacrifice your carefully curated social performance and be willing to work with people who are not like you, the people that disagree with you, that you have to be able to sort of engage in uh, disagreement in order to learn a little bit more. And so part of that means that you might have surrounded yourself with information that just already sort of agrees with what you believe, that you may have just been listening to the same article republished over and over again, and just fooled into thinking that it's the different opinions, or that it was churned out. You may have done that to yourself. So be kind to people that may be on that other end. All right. So, all right. Hey, everyone. It was fun flying solo. Let me talk, get this all off my chest. I am Jared Kubika Miller, and this is Debate Sensei. I'll see you next week.